Hi, Vahid. Thank you very much for joining us. Can you say a few words about yourself?
Hello, Mauricio. Thanks for having me and thanks for inviting me. I'm very glad to be in TU Delft. So my name is Vahid Kerousi. I work as an associate professor of software engineering in Wageningen University, which is quite close to here. I have a kind of an international background. I'm a Canadian Iranian. I've lived in Canada and I've worked in Canada and in Turkey for many years, and I've moved to Netherlands 1 year ago. So my teaching and research areas are software engineering in principle, and I have been doing research and also teaching in software testing, software quality assurance, software requirements, but mostly in testing and quality assurance. So also, I'm so passionate about collaboration with companies, which will help my education activities in software testing and also research activities.
And Vahid, back when you were in Canada, you wrote this paper. It was a survey about how Canadians were doing software testing and etc. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So that was, I think, published in 2010. So yeah, we did this study in 2009. So it was an opinion survey of different software testing practices. So it was kind of like a questionnaire about, I think, 40 to 50 questions. The survey received opinion from 246 participants, so quite a good number. And I would like to mention a few items of the main findings. So for example, we found that, according to survey results and what practitioners and software test engineers from industry in Canada said, for example, that traditional test last development. So we have this TDD and then the other keyword, which is the traditional way of doing things. We call it, and some people call it test last development, TLD, is still, or was still dominating as of 2010 in Canada. And so TLD was more popular than TDD. Of course, we would like to see more TDD, but in practice, companies are still lagging behind. And also, a few companies were using TDD and also BDD, behavior-driven development. Another finding was that in terms of, we looked at different aspects of software testing. For example, we asked them about decision to release the software, right? What factors they considered. For example, the highest ranked factors were number of passing user acceptance tests and number of defects found per day. So these were decisions that managers and testers were considering when deciding to release their software. So these were some of the findings, but of course I would like to invite the people who hear this to look at the paper for more details.
And this survey was focused on Canadian developers. Do you think it applies everywhere else, or?
Very good question. Actually, part of the paper, we were quite aware of this generalizability or how it compares to other places. We actually explicitly looked at a few other surveys, for example, one in Australia and one in Hong Kong that were published a few years back before that paper, and we actually compared when the data were comparable. Some of the results were similar to Australian and Hong Kong studies. Some of the trends were slightly different, and also according to my activities since 2006, let's say, in industry academic collaborations, many of these also I've seen them in practice, that many companies still do test last development and about issues about test automation. And also in general, we have this spectrum of maturity, right, at the end of the day. So just some companies are just to concretely speaking, are low level of maturity. So their practices are more ad hoc. They don't do things systematically. Some companies through the years, have matured their practices and knowledge in testing. So you're going to see industry spectrum of different activities, yeah.
And you mentioned test automation, and this is interesting because practitioners care a lot about test automation. In this course, we do a lot of test automation as well. You wrote this paper, this piece of research called What and What Not to Automate. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Sure, certainly. Actually, we worked, that idea came again, it was around the year 2010 or 12. Few companies approached us in Canada that said, they actually said they have challenges of deciding when and what to automate. Well, they were doing it by rule of thumb and opinions, expert opinions. They want to be more objective in deciding for those two major questions, because success or failure of test automation could related. I mean, if you don't automate the right things, then you can be in trouble. So in the context of actually one Canadian, 3 Turkish companies, we actually empirically studied that and actually developed 2 approaches. One based on system dynamics, process simulation that I think you're familiar with, and one based on genetic algorithms, which was a search-based approach to actually, for example, decide, for example, one of them was to maximize ROI. That was the genetic algorithm approach. So we developed approaches and we empirically applied and saw their benefits in helping companies doing that. So those were actually our technical studies. And also after that, we got interested to actually do a systematic review to see what others have been doing. Well, we did some stuff, we developed some approaches. And we looked at close to more than 100 resources in papers and also sources by practitioners like blogs, and we found interesting data.
Cool. And you also wrote a literature review on web testing or approaches to test web applications. Can you tell a little bit about the findings in there?
Sure. So yeah, I think these literature reviews have been interesting, and one reason has been that the companies that we interact with, sometimes they say there is immense amount of data and papers and studies out there. They want to summarize. They say, well, it's hard to read 300 papers. Can you give me a summary, at least how to classify them? If I want, for example, test my web applications using certain approach, using, let's say, state-based testing, what should I do? Anyways, because of those motivations, we conducted a systematic mapping and a separate SLR. One was more quantitative or classification. The second one was more evidence-based and synthesis-based. Some of the aspects that we looked were, for example, what type of test inputs or inferred test models have been proposed, how those test techniques for web apps work, what type of fault models or bug taxonomies are considered in different papers, because you can have functional testing, non-functional testing. What you can approach different types of bugs. Some of them are state-driven bugs or etc. What tools have been proposed in this area and what are their capabilities? So these were some of the questions that we tried to answer. I go through 2 or more. What are the metrics for assessing cost effectiveness of WAT techniques? So web application testing, WAT, because in the research community, we look at it a little bit, but for companies, cost benefit is also extremely important. Generally for test technique or any software engineering technique, you say, if I put a certain amount of cost, how much benefit I will get? Because if you have a situation that a test technique, you put, the amount of benefit is less than the cost, right? There's no point really in applying it, and to be honest. So this is something that we also have been looking at in a variety of papers.
That's very interesting. And what else have you been working on?
Sure. So with my collaborators, I mean, with academic collaborators and also companies in these few countries, recently we have been looking at several issues, several topics. 2 of them I would like to mention. Test maturity and test process improvement, which is essentially, again, I was mentioning this issue of a spectrum of maturity of companies. So different companies and teams are doing different activities in testing, but they want to improve their maturity. They want to make things more effective and efficient, because at the end of the day, these 2 are the golden words of software engineering, to do things effectively and efficiently. So we have had some good success, again, doing some empirical studies with companies, applying and improving their maturity, and also doing some systematic reviews. The second topic has been software test code engineering. So we coined this term. By test code engineering, we mean all the activities that should be conducted in the entire life cycle of test scripts or test code. So from development of test code to verification of test code, because test code is also source code, you have to verify it, and some people actually overlook it. They say, well, you write it and then that's it. Maintaining test code, verification of the test code, so all the activities in the life cycle. So we call it engineering of test code, because it's like a mini software engineering of test code. So, so we have had quite interesting, again, activities in that. We have done empirical studies in open source with test scripts of open source systems, looked at their quality, their test smells, this notion of test smells, which is, there are symptoms of low quality that in future could cause issues. There are issues of technical debt in test code, so there are different issues of test code. Test patterns, right? How to best write like design patterns, how to best write your test scripts so that they are easily maintainable. So there are lots of interesting issues.
Very interesting. And Vahid, in your opinion, what are the main challenges when testing software?
I think to summarize the answer to this question, it would be my opinion in the last 15 years has been that companies and researchers are working towards more efficiency and effectiveness in testing. All the tools and approaches that we are building, and even the studies that we are conducting, empirical studies, are trying to make things better. I mean, to do better testing, which is more effective, right? To increase the chances of finding defects, because that is what counts because that is the primary goal of testing at the end. Increasing chances of finding defects, if there are any, to find as many defects as possible, or to gain more confidence in your system, and to do more for more efficiency in testing. So these are we have made good progress in industry and academia in the last, let's say, close to 40 years. I remember the first book on testing was published, if I'm not wrong, in 1978, The Art of Software Testing, if I'm not wrong. But so this area has been around for at least 4 decades. So I think we are moving in the right direction, but more effort is needed.
Thanks. And my last question to you, Vahid. Our students here are taking their first steps in software testing. Do you have tips for them?
Sure. First of all, I wish our students best of luck in learning and moving in testing careers. I think, so in terms of what they should learn and so that they go in a better direction in their future careers, is to both learn testing fundamentals and concepts, and also about tool aspects. Sometime in consultation with some practitioners, I see that discussions tend to be very tool focused. For example, you go to some industry conferences and sometimes discussions are too tool focused, and we have very famous recent tools. I think it's like we need both wings, really. You need a good grasp of concepts like test coverage, right? What is test suite, mutation, etc. So the foundations of testing, like black box testing, white box testing, how they relate, how they complement each other, what are their limitations, so what are their strengths. So all these concepts, I think a student should be solid in this. And then, of course, to work with modern software systems and software development approaches that we have, of course, we need to use tools. But without good concept, using the tools won't be that effective. That's my argument. So that's my message.
Thank you very much, Vahid.
Thank you.